Have you ever tried to photograph directly into a bright, sunny sky and found it to be a challenge? Well, today we're going to show you how you can shoot into a sky that looks like this and still make a photo that looks like this. What's up, photography world? Josh Rogasso here from theshutterschool.com, and today we're going to show you a quick tutorial, a quick lighting tip on how you can control the sun. No, we can't boss that sun around. We cannot tell it what to do, but what we can do is make it work for us and harness its light at our own to control and tame the fire in a scene. All right, so a little bit of background on the setup here. Here is what the skyline looks like just with a normal even exposure. I'm in Atlanta and the famous Jackson Street Bridge skyline location. Most popular probably photographed skyline in the city, and it's the cover of the Walking Dead series and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so if you just take an exposure shooting into the sun, what you're going to have happen is that sun is going to be so bright it's going to overwhelm the scene. And if you want to keep that skyline looking like a skyline, you're going to need to harness that exposure. So essentially what you have to do is bring that exposure down. And the more you bring down the exposure, the more in control the sun can get, because now it's becoming a dimmer light bulb in your scene. So here is me taking a extreme example of that. So I wanted to bring that sky all the way down just to see, and kind of for fun, to make a little silhouette shot and see what I got. So here I'm at 37 millimeters with a Tamron 28-75 lens. And what I did here to bring the exposure down, when you have super strong, overwhelming sunlight, you're going to need to crank down that aperture to really cut back on the light. And the other reason, so I did f20. And the other reason that you crank down the aperture, stop down the aperture, is you can get this star effect in the sun, which is kind of cool. And I think I might be wrong, but I know the more you stop down, the more starburst you get. I could be remembering it correctly. Like I'm at f20, so I might have 20 little dashes of lines. I might be off. If somebody's more of a physics expert on this, you can correct me, or I could count the starburst. But I do know that as you stop down, you do get more starburst. I don't know if it's a 1-to-1. But anyway, you get this cool starburst effect by stopping down. All right, cool. So I got this cool background. The light is under control. It's no longer overwhelming. I'm still, even at this, because I'm shooting directly into the sun, you can still see a few split flare spots. But overall, it's in control. But I can't make a portrait that is a silhouette. So we're going to bring in the flash to fix that. So before I get into the setup on how I did that, I just want to point out something about shooting into the sun that makes it so difficult. So, and particularly with this particular lens, I think some of the lower quality glass, I thought the Tamron 28-75 is a great lens, especially for the price. It's got great sharpness, good image quality. But I think the one thing where the second tier, like the really good lenses that aren't quite as good as like the top of the line Zeiss lenses, is when I shoot into tough lighting scenarios like this. If I'm shooting into my flashes or into the sun, that's where they start to break down. I've noticed I got some, like, I've done this almost exact same shot with like a Zeiss 50 millimeter, and it handled this flare like a champ. But what you'll see is that strong direct light, as it's coming into the front element of your lens, the flare can get a little bit overwhelming. So that flare can look cool, and I'll show you some examples of where it looks cool later. And here, but what you start to see is like you can't even see the contrast in her face. It's totally washed out because it's just way too overwhelming. And so here's another example where I kind of was dialing the exposure down to kind of get it under control, and still that flare is wrapping around her face and just making it washed out. And so that is a problem with using the lower end lenses. Maybe I could try a polarizer to kind of cancel it out. Maybe next time I'm shooting directly into the sun. But really what you got to do is really work it. You're going to have to take a lot of frames and keep moving your angle to try to get that flare to not be on your subject's face. So one thing I did also is I shielded the lens above to try to block almost like a giant lens hood. And I could even leave my hand in the frame and then crop it out or Photoshop it out later just to give me a little bit of a shield. So as I was working with it, I was able to get a clean exposure. So this is the biggest challenge of shooting directly into the sun with, especially with lower quality glass, is harnessing that flare. Is just, flare can be really cool, but it can also ruin an image. So here was one frame, natural light that I was able to get. Lower the exposure a little bit, but even with the exposure lowered a little bit, as you can see, most of the sky is going to be blown out. And so the next solution, and here again, sky's kind of blown out. You don't get that cool skyline effect. It does have a cool, warm, golden, glowing skyline, so it's its own look. But we want to try to get both elements together: a cool skyline and the couple looking good. So here's how we set it up. I've got a Easy Lock softbox. It's actually a 42-inch beauty dish with a Flashpoint or the Godox ad600. And so that's going to give me enough power to kind of deal with the sun. All right, so here's how it starts out. If I'm exposing for the couple roughly, as you can see, they're going to be overwhelmed by light. The skyline is going to be blown out completely. This isn't going to work. So what I need to do is stop down and bring that exposure down. So here I'm at f18 and ISO 80. And that's how much, because directly into the sun, how much work you got to make the camera do to get that exposure down. f18. Or you could do high-speed sync and do a really fast shutter speed, but we're using flash, and I want the starburst, so I'm using the aperture instead of the shutter speed. Cool. So I get that exposure down. We're underexposed by like 2 stops or whatever, but that's obviously not going to work for the couple. So we have this Glow Easy Box 42-inch beauty dish here, and then usually when you're shooting directly in the sun with the 8600, you're probably going to want to be on full power or half power. I like to be on half power as my full power, because once you get into full power, the recycle time, it takes a couple seconds, and you're going to overwork that flash. So I usually don't like to go past half power, but so there it is with probably half power. And now all of a sudden you're balancing out the exposure, bringing them back up. And so then here's the final shot where you zoom in and crop out the flash, do a little bit of editing, make everything pop. But even here, as you can see, this is a big flare hotspot I could get rid of. There's a little bit of flare on her shoulder that looks cool, but it's where a little bit of contrast lost in her hair here, but overall it held up. You can tackle that flare a lot better when you're underexposing, but that's one advantage of using the better glass. So that's the basics. You want to get a large light source as close to the subject as you can, so that you can still get a soft, even light that can balance out the sun. And then what's cool is you're using the sun as a rim light here. So the back of her hair and her shoulders and the back of the jacket is lit up, and that looks really cool as well. So it's basically a 2-light setup, a giant sun as a light, and a giant beauty dish softbox as the front light. So that's the basic setup. If you're shooting into the sun, you want to use that sun as a rim light, stop down, have yourself a big light source. It works a lot better with a big light source because this light is harsh. You want to soften it up and cancel it out. All right, so then another example of natural light. So here I'm down low, and notice what's happening. The skyline is completely blown out, but this looks really cool because I can't really get the skyline in the shot anyway. It's just barely peeking up here and here. So it doesn't matter too much, but they're getting that super warm glow from that natural sunlight. So I didn't need a flash in the shot. It works. So you don't always need to do the overpowering the flash thing. But then when I moved up and tried to get the skyline in it, I kind of balanced it out and I kind of shot it both ways because I knew both would look kind of cool. So here's the natural light working for me because I was getting it in the right angle. I'm not getting overwhelmed by flare. I'm low enough that I can kind of block the sun with their body. That's the other key, is you do not want that sun in your lens frame if you're worried about the flare. And now that it's in my frame, I stop down and overpower the exposure with the flash. And now you can kind of handle the flare. And a couple more examples where I just did some solo portraits for them. Did the same thing. They're getting the rim light from the sun, 42-inch beauty dish from the front. And as you can see here, there's a little bit of loss of contrast in his coat. I did a little bit of dehaze slider, I think, to try to fix it a little bit. And that's where maybe having better glass or a polarizer would have saved me there. Or just kind of working the scene, getting the angle right where the flare is just not ruining your shot. But anyway, next time it's a bright sunny day, don't be intimidated. Bring out a flash, or a strobe rather, and try to make that exposure work for you and see if you can get something cool. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe so you can help our channel grow, and I'll make more tutorial videos for you. Get out there and shoot, and we'll see you in the next video.